and we're on our final break again of the day, and we're hopping into reading once again 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And yesterday we left off on, well, we're still in chapter one, obviously, because we started yesterday, but we ended on the subtitle or subchapter, The End of Eternity. So, this is a normal bookworm thing where you just use whatever you can as your actual bookmark. I've used a lot of random things. That's fine by me. But again, wife and I are reading a lot more this year. That is our goal, and this is one of the books that I'm starting on now. So hopefully, it's going to glean or have a couple good nuggets of information that I can continue to use on my life. And also at the same time, I still don't know if this is copyright infringement or not. I'm going to assume it's not because I'm talking in between. So with that, let's get to reading. All right. The End of Eternity. There's one huge drawback in giving so little thought to the abstract idea of time, though which is that it severely limits what you can accomplish. You can be a small-scale farmer relying on the seasons for your schedule, but you can't be much other than a small-scale farmer or baby. As soon as you want to coordinate the actions of more than a handful of people, you'll need a reliable, agreed-upon method of measuring time. This is widely held to be how the first mechanical clock came to be invented by medieval monks who had begun their morning prayers while it was still dark and needed some way of ensuring that the whole monastery woke up at the required point. Their earlier strategies included deputizing one monk to stay awake all night, watching the movement of the stars, a system that worked only when it wasn't cloudy and the night shift monk didn't fall asleep. Making time standardized and visible in this fashion inevitably encouraged people to think of it as an abstract thing with an independent existence, distinct from the specific activities on which one might spend it. Time is what ticks away as the hands move around the clock face. The Industrial Revolution is usually attributed to the invention of the steam engine, but as Mumford shows in his 1934 magnum opus, Technics and Civilization, it also probably couldn't have happened without the clock. By the late 1700s, rural peasants were streaming into English cities, taking jobs in mills and factories, each of which required the coordination of hundreds of people, working fixed hours, often 6 days a week, to keep the machines running. From thinking about time in the abstract, it's natural to start treating it as a resource, something to be bought and sold and used as efficiently as possible, like coal or iron or any other raw material. Previously, laborers had been paid for a vaguely defined day's work or on a piecework basis, receiving a given sum per bale of hay or per pig slaughtered. But gradually, it became more common to be paid by the hour, and the factory owners who used his workers' hours efficiently, squeezing out as much labor as possible from each employee, stood to make a much bigger profit than the one who didn't. Indeed, some cantankerous industrials came to feel that workers who didn't drive themselves hard enough were literally guilty of stealing something. I have been sundry people, been horribly cheated, fumed the iron magnate Ambrose Crowley from the County Durham in England, in a memo in the 1790s, announcing his new policy of deducting pay for time spent smoking, singing, reading of news, history, contention, disputes, and anything foreign to my business or in any way loitering. The way Crowley saw it, his lackadaisical employees were thieves, illegitimately helping themselves to containers from the conveyor belt of time. You don't need to believe, as Mumford sometimes seems to imply, that the invention of the clock is solely to blame for all of our time-related troubles today. And I certainly won't be arguing for a return to the lifestyle of medieval peasants. Hey there, Jimmy Monts. But a threshold had been crossed. Before time was just the medium in which life unfolded, the stuff that life was made of. Afterward, once time and life have been separated in most people's minds, time became a thing that you used. And it's this shift that serves as a precondition for all the uniquely modern ways in which we struggle with time today. Once time is a resource to be used, you start to feel pressure, whether from external forces or from yourself, to use it well, and to berate yourself when you feel you've wasted it. When you're faced with too many demands, it's easy to assume that the only answer must be to make better use of time by becoming more efficient, driving yourself harder, or working for longer. as if you were a machine in the Industrial Revolution, instead of asking whether the demands themselves might be unreasonable. It grows alluring to try to multitask. That is, to use the same portion of time for two things at once. As the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was the first to notice, one thinks with a watch in one's hand, he complained in his 1887 essay, even as one eats one midday meal while reading the latest news of the stock market. And it becomes a lot more intuitive to project your thoughts about your life into an imagined future, leaving you anxiously wondering if things will unfold as you want them to. Soon, your sense of self worth gets completely bound up in how you're using time. It stops being merely the water in which you swim and turns into something you feel you need to dominate or control. If you're to avoid feeling guilty, panicked, or overwhelmed, the title of a book that arrived on my desk the other day sums things up nicely. Master Your Time, Master Your Life. Hi, what is this? I am currently reading through 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. My wife and I are currently working on reading goals for this year, and this is one of the books that I picked because working a 9 to 5 job, having an issue with time management on my end, as your Gen Z coworker is my tagline, is stressful. And getting answers to that is great. So currently we're in chapter 1 at the moment because I'm, obviously reading it out loud. The fundamental problem is that this attitude toward time sets up a rigged game in which it's impossible to ever feel as though you're doing well enough. And you guys let me know if I am reading too fast, too slow, or enunciating poorly, because I'm trying to, make this entertaining for you guys somewhat, or at least valuable. All right. It's impossible to ever feel as if you're doing well enough. Instead of simply living our lives as they unfold in time, instead of just being time, you must say, or you might say, it becomes difficult not to value each moment primarily according to its usefulness for some future goal or for some future oasis of relaxation you hope to reach once your tasks are finally out of the way. Superficially, this seems like a sensible way to live, especially in a hyper-competitive economic climate in which it feels as though you must constantly make the most judicious use of your time if you want to stay afloat. It also reflects the manner in which most of us were raised, to prioritize future benefits over current enjoyments, but ultimately it backfires. It wrenches us out of the present, leading to a life spent learning or leaning into the future, worrying about whether things will work out, experiencing everything in terms of some later hoped for benefit, so that peace of mind never quite arrives. And it makes it all but impossible to experience deep time, that sense of timelessness time, which depends on forgetting the abstract yardstick and plunging back into the vividness of reality instead. As this modern mindset came to dominate, wrote Mumford, eternity ceased gradually to serve as the measure and focus of human actions. In its place came the dictatorship of the clock, the schedule, and the Google Calendar alert, Marilyn Robinson, joyless urgency, and the constant feeling that you ought to be getting more done. The trouble with attempting to master your time, it turns out, is that time ends up mastering you. Confessions of a Productivity Geek. That sounds familiar. The rest of this book is an exploration of a saner way relating to time and a toolbox of practical ideals for doing so, drawn from the work of philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual teachers who all reject the struggle to dominate or master it. I believe it sketches a kind of life that vastly more peaceful and meaningful, while also, it turns out, being better for sustained productivity in the long haul. But don't get me wrong, I spent years trying and failing to achieve mastery over my time. In fact, the symptoms were especially glaring in the subspecies to which I belonged. I was a productivity geek. You know how some people are passionate about bodybuilding or fashion or rock climbing or poetry. Productivity geeks are passionate about crossing items off the to-do list. So it's sort of the same, except infinitely sadder. My adventures with Inbox Zero were only the tip of the iceberg. I've squandered countless hours and a fair amount of money spent mainly on some fancy notebooks and a felt tip pens in service to belief that I could only find the right time management, build the right habits, and apply sufficient self-discipline, I might actually be able to win the struggle with time once and for all. I was enabled in this delusion by writing a weekly newspaper column on productivity, which gave me an excuse to experiment with new techniques on the grounds that I was doing so for work purposes. I was like an alcoholic conveniently employed as a wine expert. On one occasion, I tried scheduling the whole of every day in 15-minute blocks. On another, I used a kitchen timer to work exclusively in periods of 25 minutes interspersed with 5-minute breaks. This approach has an official name, the Pomodoro Technique, and has a cult following online. I divide my list into A, B, C priorities. Guess how many B and C priority tasks I ever got around to completing. I tried to align my daily actions with my goals and my goals with my core values. Using these techniques often made me feel as if I were on the verge of ushering in the golden era of calm, undistracted productivity, and meaningful activity, but it never arrived. Instead, I just got more stressed and more unhappy. I remember sitting on a park bench near my home in Brooklyn one winter morning in 2014, feeling even more anxious than usual about the volume of undone tasks and suddenly realizing that none of this is ever going to work. I would never succeed in marshaling enough efficiency, self discipline, and effort to force my way through to the feeling that I was on top of everything, that I was fulfilling all my obligations and had no need to worry about the future. Ironically, the realization that this had been a useless strategy for attaining peace of mind brought me some immediate peace of mind. After all, once you become convinced that something you've been attempting isn't possible, it's a lot harder to keep on berating yourself for failing. What I had yet to understand at this point was why all these methods were doomed to fail, which was that I was using them to try to obtain a feeling of control over my life that would always remain out of reach. Though I'd been largely unaware of it, my productivity obsession had been serving a hidden emotional agenda. For one thing, it helped me combat the sense of precariousness inherent to modern world of work. If I could meet every demand while launching various side projects of my own, maybe one day I'd finally feel secure in my career and my finances. But it also held at bay certain scary questions about what I was doing with my life and whether major changes might not be needed. If I could get enough work done, my subconscious had apparently concluded I wouldn't need to ask if it was all healthy to be deriving so much of my self worth from work in the first place. And as long as I was always on just the cusp of mastering my time, I could avoid the thought that what life was really demanding from me might involve surrendering the crave for mastery and diving into the unknown instead. In my case, that turned out to mean committing to a long term relationship and later making the decision with my wife to try to start a family. Two things I'd normally failed to get done with any number of systems for getting things done. It had been more comforting to imagine that I might eventually optimize myself into the kind of person who could confront such a decision without fear, feeling totally in charge of the process. I didn't want to accept that this was never going to happen. The fear was part of the deal, and that experience, it wouldn't destroy me. But don't worry, we won't be dwelling here on my personal hangups. The universal truth behind my specific issues is that most of us invest a lot of energy, one way or another, in trying to avoid fully experiencing the reality in which we find ourselves. We don't want to feel the anxiety that might arise if we were to ask ourselves whether we're on the right path or what ideas about ourselves it could be time to give up. We don't want to risk getting hurt in relationships or failing professionally. We don't want to accept that we might never succeed in pleasing our parents or in changing certain things we don't like about ourselves. And we certainly don't want to get sick and die. The details differ from person to person, but the kernel is the same. We recoil from the notion that this is it, that this life, with all its flaws and inescapable vulnerabilities, its extreme brevity, and our limited influence over how it unfolds is the only one we'll get a shot at. Instead, we mentally fight against the way things are. All right. Well, I'm like, hey, I appreciate that. My break is over. My clock just went off. So we're going to stop here. Currently on page 30 of, again, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Berkman. So I got to get back to work, close out my day. This is your Gen Z coworker signing out, keeping everything simple. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your work day. Make sure you guys go out there and do great things. I'll catch y'all later.